That's kind of soothing music. Welcome to The Nose. I don't ever remember the music being so relaxing, but I also don't remember more than maybe 3 weeks back in my life. So it could have been. So we have three topics, there's no Irene Papoulis here to generate what we call a Papoulian through line on The Nose, where you can sort of tie everything together. But in her absence, I actually do think eventually I will be able to do this, if I can remember how. Let me tell you who's here. First, Carolyn Payne is an actress, comedian, dancer, founder, director, and choreographer of Kinetic Dance. Tracy Wu Fastenberg, Director of Development at Covenant Preparatory School, and Bill Usman is Director of Media Literacy and Digital Culture Graduate Program at Sacred Heart University. In reverse order, I'll tell you what our topics are today. We've watched, some of us have finished a series called 7 Seconds on Netflix. It is I keep calling it a gritty urban drama. It's sort of the Richard Price genre of a story about crime in an urban environment, in this case, Jersey City, and cover-ups and good cops and bad cops and DAs with drinking problems and stuff like that. So anyway, we'll get there eventually. But before that, we will talk about the fact that the Obamas are now in deep negotiations, apparently, with Netflix to become essentially content creators on Netflix. Both President Obama and Michelle Obama they're each going to do their own thing, too, apparently, from what has trickled out here. And I'm guessing from what has trickled out here, we are meant to have it trickled out to us. I don't think there was some leak the way there is in like 7 seconds. Anyway, but we're going to begin with the New York Times so-called Overlooked Project. This, you may know about it already. It is a decision by the New York Times, a determination to do a set of obituaries, at least for starters, for 15 women who did not get obituaries. They are women who lived in both the 19th and 20th centuries, and they include some people who perhaps the New York Times could not have known about if they made even a token effort. And then there's some people that you sort of can't believe did not get New York Times obituaries in the first place, people like Diane Arbus, Sylvia Plath, who were very well known at the time. And in that first category might be somebody like Henrietta Lacks, who is very famous now because cancer cells were taken from her body without permission, and they led to a medical revolution. But I think until that book was written about her, I'm not sure how many people knew about her. Ida B. Wells was a pretty well-known pioneer in taking on racism in the Deep South, powerful reporting on lynchings, didn't get an obit. Anyway, so that's where we're beginning. And I guess maybe I wish I had a perfectly pointed question to ask, but I probably don't. So Tracy Wu Fastenberg, maybe you and I can get the conversation going here. I mean, in general, I guess here's how I'll begin. I struggle these days when things like this happen to where to put my energy, into a sense of despair and outrage about the omissions of the past, or a sense of elation and hope about the corrections of the present. How are you mixing up that ratio right now?
I think it's always important to acknowledge the wrongs of the past. But I think if you dwell on it too much and you don't move forward, then you never get any further. You just keep on sitting there saying, well, we screwed up. Yes, this does not make up for overlooking these women in the past. I think they did a wonderful job of being inclusive on the list. They didn't just include well-known white women that got overlooked, but they included women of color, transgender women, a whole host of folks. And I think they were very deliberate about that. And I think that in trying to make some sort of reparation, they did a decent job of it. And I think it sounds like they want to continue doing this also. So if they keep on handling it with the same care and also rectifying the situation as more folks pass and not just focusing on what they've traditionally focused on, then that's progress.
Right.
I think that's acknowledging and trying to make it right as best you can.
Well, I mean, it appears, and Bill Usman, you've been paying special attention to that. I mean, there have been several different explanatory articles in the New York Times about what's happening here and why it's happening. One of them came from two women journalists / obit writers who've been drivers of the project, but yet another one came out from William McDonald, who's the head of the whole obit enterprise there. But the women have said that even in the last 2 years, 1 in 5 New York Times obits is a woman. which once again, we'd like to celebrate the kind of vision that led to this series. But it seems like they have a contemporary problem here too.
But they've acknowledged it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is entirely a good thing. I think it's really possible to be cynical and, to kind of dismiss it as a symbolic gesture. But I think symbolic gestures are really, really important. I think that ties into some of the other things we're going to talk about today. Symbolic gestures are one of the ways that we hope to change the world and learn from our mistakes and move forward. Not everybody appreciates that. And there's a really, I find really interesting piece by the current editor of the New York Times obituaries that I saw as just really kind of defensive, kind of making up these excuses of, well, we can't, write an obit for everybody and it's very, very exclusive and this number of people die every day and we only do 3. And maybe it's because women didn't have the ability to attain these positions of power before. But all of it seems to me like a very kind of begrudging defense after the fact.
Well, Carolyn, it sort of gives new meaning to the phrase "time's up," because when your time's up, will the New York Times even know that your time's up? Will they even acknowledge that? I don't know. What was your reaction?
How long
to
were
all
you
this?
sitting on that one?
I can actually promise. I actually swear to God, it just came to me. I'm not that well prepared for the show. I promise you.
Wait, what was the question?
I'm just letting you say whatever you want to say.
I don't know. I think that this is. I think it's a good thing. I'm just one of those people who's always cautiously optimistic about stuff. I feel like in some ways an obit, to get recognition in an obituary is sort of a big bummer anyway. Like, right?
Not for you.
Well,
not for the person who's being
bummed because you
written
want that
about.
recognition when you're out there doing these things.
Okay.
So, I'm hoping that it goes further than this, that maybe it's more that we continue to give recognition to women who are currently doing things and not just searching out some really good old obituaries. So that's like where I'm hoping this also pushes that they are looking for more live women who are actively doing cool things now.
I mean, I think these days they do a pretty good job of that. But,
Sure.
But I think your point's a good one, which I thought a little bit about this. Okay, so my father had a New York Times obituary. My father, who was a white male, had a New York Times obituary. Now, why did he have a New York Times obituary? Well, I sent some, information about his death to the New York Times, and I said, look in your files, see if you think this is worth one of your obits. Well, they looked in their files, and they found a bunch of stuff about my father. So to your point, and so they did an obit. So to Carolyn's point, that's the way this reinforces itself. How do you know somebody who has died is important enough to warrant a New York Times obit? Well, they don't do it that way every single time, and they really, do these marvelous obits about people who have been completely undocumented, like the inventor of stovetop stuffing or something, and I always just, scarf down these obits like they actually were stovetop stuffing. I love those things.
And apparently you love stovetop stuffing.
I haven't had any in a while, but it seems sentimentally like a good idea. But Carolyn's point's a good one. If you create a record that doesn't have a lot of women in it, then when you look up the record, you're not going to find anybody.
But I think that's the problem with this gentleman's response, too, is that his defense is part of the problem. He's not recognizing that because women in general are not recognized throughout their lives, there are barriers put up by our systems to attain these certain positions that would afford them a New York Times obituary. Well, then they don't get one. So it's sort of he's using the problem as his defense, and the defense is his problem. And so I felt like that article and that rebuttal, if you will, was sort of unnecessary.
Right. It was a bad idea to write that. And then when Bill sent it around, I thought, oh, my God, just don't write this. Why are you doing this? But on the other hand, Bill, there is something thrilling about the project, too. I mean, reading the obituaries of some of the people, you know a lot about, but some of these people you don't. And that is something the New York Times typically does really well, maybe not as inclusively as would have been desirable. But now that they're doing it, I don't know. I would just, once again, I'm just eating up these stories like Crave cereal, I guess is the
or Thin Mints.
that's an inside joke. But
No,
anyway, yeah.
I agree. I think it's fantastic, and I'm begrudging in my praise for the New York Times sometimes. I do think it's a important institution, and that's why this is important. But they do, like all institutions, have their problems. But I think this is excellent, and I love the way the people behind it are saying they're expanding this. They're starting with women, but they're moving out into other groups that have been, quote, overlooked, and that's an understatement. But I also take Carolyn's point, which I think is excellent. Like, let's not just do this for dead people. It's really easy to say nice things about dead people. I mean, I always think about Muhammad Ali, who, is revered, now that he's no longer with us, but was reviled when he was and when he was in his prime. But I do think it's an excellent step, and I think it's really necessary, and I think it's really interesting that some of the old guard at the Times feel a little uncomfortable about it. That, to me, that's an indication of how good of a step it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obituaries are always kind of a battlefield, too. In fact, when you sent us the article by William McDonald, I got interested in, first of all, wanted to know if anybody else was kind of covering the backstairs part of this, and I couldn't really find anything. But I found the last time that William McDonald was kind of heavily in the news, it was because the New York Times had written an obit about the death of the leader of the Mormon Church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, and they kind of led with the fact that he was a revered leader within the church, but had resisted the ordination of women as priests and had, resisted equality for gay Mormons, and that was like all in the lead. And the Mormon Church had a huge freak out about this and really attacked the Times in multiple ways. And he had to sort of, lay out his argument because, I mean, that's the other thing about obits that always gets said over and over again, which is they're news stories about you and your dead, and they're not eulogies. So, I mean, even if you get an obit when you're dead, there's no real guarantee that it's going to say everything that you want said. I don't know why I'm looking at you as I say that.
Yeah, I don't know.
I have to look at somebody.
Yeah, direct to some. Well, that I guess I was fascinated reading these. I certainly was, and I will continue. I mean, I'm not an active, I don't subscribe to the Times, so in order for me to kind of discover something there, I see it posted or hear about something and seek it out. And this is something that I would seek out that they're doing. But I think that I really do want to see where they go with it before I start championing this as, yay, look what they're doing for women.
Right. I do think that some of this is part of a larger evolution. I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't know who Ada Lovelace was. I've known quite a bit about Ada Lovelace in recent years and seen her depicted in she was just depicted in that Victoria series. And I mean, she's a much more familiar kind of person. And of course, Henrietta Lacks, her story was buried until that book was done. So maybe some of this is just sort of part of the evolution of us learning to tell more kinds of stories, including death stories. Anyway, somehow or other, I will make a transition from there to the story, the other thing that's kind of linked in this thing, in this first segment, and that is the news. And it just trickled out this morning that the Obamas are in, I think the New York Times is now calling it advanced negotiations. I don't know what that means, but it's, I guess, more than just trivial negotiations. With Netflix, they are going to be content creators of some kind. They are interested in developing content that will be positive and inspirational. There are a couple of ideas about what these shows might be that have been floated around. I don't know how serious they were. I was immediately disappointed in Tracy Fastenberg because I know that President Obama is heavily addicted to Game of Thrones and would get the screeners ahead of time and stuff. I thought, he's going to have some kind of Sword and Dragon series with him in it. I can't wait. But apparently,
I would watch that.
I wonder who the dragon would be.
Yeah, he's not going to do Black Panther 2 or anything like that. He's going to do stuff that sort of fits much more with what we expect from him. But I don't know. How did you react to this idea?
I have sort of mixed reactions. I mean, it'd be nice to see them more in the eye again. I think people feel nostalgic for just a couple of years ago. You have all kinds of folks that post about, they'll post a Trump story and be like, I miss the Obamas. So I think that it's a good sort of panacea for some of that. But I think that it can also be harmful in sort of siloing us a little bit. more into what we want to hear and what we want to believe. But it's also hopeful. I think we hear so much terrible stuff in the news and unbelievable things coming out of the White House that we need to hang on to something for those of us who are
But that's
not Trump fans. You know, we need to hang on to something else and something different in order to sort of hope that things get better.
TV production right now is just heavily rooted in this nostalgia thing. Like we have the Full House reboot. Roseanne is coming back. You know,
Gilmore Girls.
you just have all there is just so much Will and Grace. Like everything is back. And I feel like bringing the Obamas to TV is kind of the same thing. It's like it's that same kind of button they're trying to push with us, where it's like, look, remember when everything was okay? Come tune in.
I need
Everything
that
will be okay
sometimes. I
here.
need that
It
sometimes,
was only
bro.
a year ago.
Yeah.
They also have a comedy series called That's So W, which they're working on as well. So that was a joke. It didn't land, apparently.
I got
Okay.
scared. I was like, really? Really?
That's true.
I
That's-
know that Jenna Bush girl is on some sort of daytime
Yeah,
talk
right.
show.
That's the only problem with jokes these days is they might be true. So, Bill, you and we talk about this. We both teach about this too. That increasingly the division between culture and politics is an illusion, really. You know, the culture is politics and vice versa. So, and obviously we have a president now who comes from reality television, which is maybe the less admirable part of culture. But I don't know. As a guy who teaches this all the time, what's your reaction?
Yeah, I think that it was always an illusion that there was somehow some division between culture and politics. I mean, that's just such a ridiculous notion that culture is not thoroughly political always and always has been. I have to say, when I first saw, this thing about the goal of this being kind of inspirational programming, I blanched a little bit, and I said to you all in email that I started thinking about, the Hallmark Channel or Touched by an Angel or something like that. And, that I wouldn't have any interest in whatsoever. But then you did something interesting, Colin. You also sent us a story about what they're trying to do in India with like this move to really focus on positive news, and that started making me think about this in a different way. That we are Trump was elected because of his relentless telling everyone how horrible everything was, that phrase American carnage, and really just basically scaring everybody to death. And then, I'm the only one who can fix it. And, that constant dwelling on, how terrible everything is, and, you need to be afraid and things are falling apart around you. I think that's a really powerful explanation of what's going on in our society right now. And maybe something that counters that could be a really positive thing in getting us to realize that there are solutions to problems that don't involve these really draconian kind of measures.
Right. So yeah, in India they have tried this thing called the Better India. It seems actually to have some traction. It seems to be catching on a little bit. But it goes back, Tracy, to the point that you're making too. Like I had the same thought as Bill that and in India what they thought was we have too much negativity and divisiveness in our media. What if we created content that was sort of about the opposite thing? And I had the same thought about the campaign that that the message of the campaign so much was you live in a hellhole right now. And I mean, in talking to the African American community, as you recall, he'd say, "What do the blacks have to lose?"
A lot.
I mean, but his message to everybody, was American carnage. You live in a terrible place right now. This country isn't what it used to be, and there is a need for it. But I think you're asking a really good question, which is who's going to watch this programming? What kind of swayable person is going to seek this out on Netflix? And we probably don't really know the answer, but it's a good one. Good question.
But I also think that people want to hear that, yes, we can again, rather than American carnage. And I think people do need to hear that. And yes, it'll probably be the folks who already feel that way who watch it. I can't see a whole lot of Fox and Breitbart fans tuning in unless, they want to be able to somehow eviscerate it in whatever way they will. But I think that for some of us, we may want that. We might need that in certain ways, because turning on CNN and hearing about adult entertainers taking out the White House is not exactly what we were hoping to see. And we want maybe something a little more substantive than happy cat videos, which I have nothing against, but seems to be the,
I don't know. If you have like Obama and Michelle presenting happy cat videos, I think.
I think you have the best of both worlds.
Yeah,
then.
right?
Well, I mean, I want to go back to this whole issue. It was interesting, Carolyn, that you were sort of naming other kinds of, reunion shows and things from the past coming back. And Jonathan is pointing out that they brought back Letterman and had Obama on it. One Day at a Time, Queer Eye is back in a new form. I want to do a nose about that at some point, too.
I will watch that.
You will watch that. We'll actually give you something to watch that will make you happy.
The first time
Hopefully.
ever.
First
that
time
you'll
ever.
I think
watch.
there's been one.
Yeah.
I think I liked one show
But
once.
it is. I know I say this a lot on the show, and I in my class that I'm teaching right now, we have a motto, and the motto is every day something has to happen. Because in fact, here in the Trump era, that's sort of the weekly motto of reality television, right? It's like something has to happen. So at minimum, there has to be like wine throwing or something. Now I really am looking at you because I'm.
I have never thrown my wine.
No, but I mean,
on
like
camera.
you watch enough of this stuff to know that there's sort of there's a way in which the rhythms of our lives in the Trump administrations, of our political lives in the Trump administrations, are very much keyed to what happens on reality television, which is where he comes from. Like stuff has to happen all the time. There has to be a story told all the time. He's very intent on making that happen. And I sort of wonder whether Obama content is, if it's too high-minded, that actually could be a problem too.
Yeah, I mean, living in the Trump era is like waking up every day and looking at your cell phone to see what fresh hell has happened in the 8 peaceful hours you managed to get. And I think maybe it could be that having Obama Network would just be very pacifying and not. But I think Michelle and Barack, what they managed to be, especially as we're seeing them now back to being civilians, is they are charming and they are fun. Like a couple weeks ago, these pictures emerged of them in a photo booth, just being so precious. Like it was just these kind of goals that you have in your mind of being a human that has a relationship with another human like that, and it just. So I think that people. There is this kind of nostalgia of remembering we once had this at our helm. And I think that people would watch what they do because they are fun and they are smart. And I think that they do have a lot to offer. I mean, Michelle Obama, every time she's on Ellen, it's great. So, I think that they aren't going to be afraid, I think, to incorporate some lowbrow humor and that sense of fun that they have and that they tend to embody.
Michelle had a dance party with a 2-year-old who loved her
Oh
portrait.
my goodness!
Yeah. That's sort of it. That's not particularly highbrow, but it is sort of just that finding joy in simple things and doing something
like Michelle
silly.
going through CVS with Ellen. Right. I remember seeing that video and just I think that if there are moments like that kind of lace into it, it will.
I think you're being kind of unfair because Melania has hired people to do a lot of those things, dance with children, go to CVS. No, okay. But I just committed the exact sin that I was going to bring up with you, which is so when Obama was on with Letterman in the debut episode of Letterman's Netflix interview series, it's something that he said. He absolutely knows the problem that Tracy identified. He said, "Look, if you watch MSNBC and I watch Fox News, we live in completely different realities. We have all the nostalgia that we're all talking about here does not exist for a huge part of the country. Their idea was that this was an ineffectual administration that couldn't get anything done. And it's a whole completely different narrative. And if you don't puncture those silos, I don't know how much you really do accomplish.
Well, I think those people do have nostalgia, but it's just nostalgia that goes back a lot further.
Right.
It's
1950s.
nostalgia to when everybody knew their place, so to speak. But I agree, and I think bridging those divides is increasingly difficult. It is we are truly a polarized society. There's no question about that. I don't know if this is even intended to do that. I think it's significant that it's Netflix, and I think I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I think the Venn diagram between Netflix viewers and Fox viewers is probably a pretty small sliver.
It's hard to do because Netflix is so proprietary with their viewership information.
It would be, but I think that data would be interesting. And I do think by going through Netflix, there is a particular group of people that they're trying to appeal to, and it does give them the license to be a little bit more, as you say, high-minded, because of who they're trying to reach. And I think Tracy made a great point in our email exchanges that yes, that isn't really bridging the divide, but on the other hand, it's really empowering for people who really need to be empowered right now. The people who are feeling like, what just happened, and we're on the defensive, and we have to fight back, and we have to get, some sort of sense of justice back into our society. But Tracy said, you have to have something to fight for, not just to fight against. And maybe, this is an attempt to try to give people something to fight for.
Of course, coming soon, Netflix for conservatives, Death Wish movies on demand. All right, we have to take a break. We're going to come back, talk about 7 Seconds. And we are indeed back with the nose. Joining us are actress, comedian, dancer Carolyn Payne, Tracy Wu Fastenberg from Covenant Preparatory School, Bill Usman, director of media literacy and digital culture graduate program at Sacred Heart University. We are going to talk right now about a Netflix original series called 7 Seconds. We'll give you a little clip from the pilot. I should have looked at the transcript of this clip first so I could set it up, but you're going to hear two parents, Isaiah and Latrice Butler. They are talking to an assistant district attorney and to a detective who are basically laying out what will become the facts of this series.
What happened to my son? All they said is he was in a car accident.
Yeah, no one's talked to us. The police haven't said anything.
There'll be a bail hearing tomorrow morning before the arraignment at the county
That's
courthouse.
not what they asked. We need to know exactly how this happened.
Your son was in a hit and run this morning at Liberty State Park.
This morning? They didn't call us until a few hours ago.
Oh, that's when they found him earlier tonight. 2 people found him. Their dog, actually.
We have the man in custody who we believe did this.
It's a nice bike your son's got. 5 Kings rides him, too. That series of BMX goes for some serious bank.
What are you implying? That Brennan's with a gang? Really? You gonna do this right now?
You want to step back, whoever you are, and let me talk to the family?
I am family, and I don't appreciate you coming up in here and accusing my nephew.
Let me handle this.
We bought the bike. Brenton's 16th birthday's coming up soon.
What's gonna happen to the man who did this?
Well, I'll be charging Mr. Dorsey with leaving the scene of a motor vehicle accident resulting in serious bodily injury. And I'll suggest the maximum sentence for this type of felony.
Which is what exactly?
3 to 5 years.
What we already know, it is the very first thing that we know, so I'm not spoiling anything for you, is we already know who hit the young man, who hit Brenton Butler. It's a cop, a young cop. His name is Jablonski. He didn't mean to do it, but he's new to the force, new to the Vice Squad that he's on, the other 3 members of the Vice Squad, right at the beginning of the series. Once again, I'm not spoiling anything, kind of take over at the crime scene, send him on his way, and cover the whole thing up. A, to keep him out of trouble, but B, because and I think it is pretty strongly hinted at that in the current environment, in the environment of Black Lives Matter, they don't want any kind of inquest into a white cop hitting a black bicyclist, a 15-year-old black bicyclist. There are other secrets, it turns out, that they would like to cover up. And it turns out a lot of people in this series, good people and bad people, have secrets that they have been keeping. You might also have heard the voice of Regina King, probably the only really famous performer who's in this series, although the second episode was directed by Jonathan Demme, probably the last directing credit of Jonathan Demme's life and career. So, where should we begin? Carolyn, should we begin with you? You got up at 5 a.m. to work on finishing this series. That is nose dedication.
Yeah. Well, here's what happened was these two went ahead and spent their whole snow day binging this show.
Shh, I was hard at work.
Yeah.
As was I.
Okay. So anyway, I then felt via email that I had fallen behind. And since I did not spend my snow day binging it and then had lots of stuff going on yesterday, I panicked and attempted to watch it last night, but it was a little too heavy for late night. So I got up at 5. So,
So it is heavy. We should say that. And
It
we are
is.
going to work hard not to spoil things for you.
I will try not
But,
to. I will tell you, it is the longest Law and Order episode that I've ever seen. I was explaining to Bill that this is like if you happen to fall asleep on the couch watching Law and Order and you wake up and it's like a different episode, but in your mind you've combined them into one episode. That's what watching this show is. And it's one of those shows that, like, yes, it's bingeable, but only because you're waiting for something that's something to happen. You're waiting for these like big moments. Which I think, like in the last episode, you finally get some of that.
I should say that I'm the person who suggested this series, and I'm the only one who hasn't finished it because my excuse is I lost my cable in the snowstorm. But I'm getting there. I mean, Tracy, one difference between this and Law and Order is in Law and Order there is a pretty consistent notion of honorable people who are seeking an honorable result. You know, I mean, from Sam Waterston to all the cops and stuff. They're trying to make the right thing happen. They're dealing with a flawed human race. But that is not the case here. The number of people that you can put any faith in any part of this story and have that faith be constantly validated is a very small number.
Yeah, I would say that my husband walked in on me, I think it was a couple episodes in. I'm like, I don't like a single character in this series. I mean, you get to like them, but it's also because some of them are very human. They're nuanced with good and bad and flaws and all of that. But some of them are sort of, and this is my problem with the series, is that some of the characters are so stereotypical, sort of exactly what you expect from like the sort of thuggish cop who, is dirty and doesn't really have a conscience, except for like maybe 30 seconds here and 10 seconds there. And the DA with a drinking problem who's overworked and has a tragic past with another case, that type of thing. But I do think that it was in certain ways a little more real because none of us are purely good or purely bad. So for those sort of main characters that were very flawed but trying to do the right thing but never convinced that they were actually doing it, I thought that was a little more realistic.
Well, and I think it's a credit to the acting too. I think the actors in this show, it's so well cast because so many of them have such fascinating faces to watch. The cop, the dirty cop, D'Angelo. I want to say DiGiorno, but that's a pizza.
That's a pizza.
I've been up since 5. D'Angelo, I thought he was great. The actor who plays Fish, even the actor who plays. The one who we know killed
Jablonski.
Jablonski. Even he's fascinating. They're just fascinating to watch, and I think they do a really nice job playing these flawed characters that you aren't supposed to like.
Bill, I want to do some media literacy here with this series. I think it's got some interesting things that it's trying to talk about, including people who really are marginalized. I mean, there are a lot of people of both the white and African American races who are working double shifts to make ends meet, who are one character goes back on the corner just because he's out of the service and he can't find any kind of gainful employment. There's a lot of stuff in here. A lot of the sort of subtext of this series is these are all kinds of people who are having a hard time in America.
Yeah, absolutely. At one point, I wrote down, I was making little notes. Every single person is damaged. Mm-hmm. They are all just damaged. But one of the things I liked about it is that so often television and Hollywood represent damaged people as just being just kind of bad people, just people who are damaged through to their own faults and their own negligence. And I felt like this program worked really hard not to do that. These people are grinded down by systems that just don't care about them. They don't care about the poor or the working class or people of color. And that's a real source of all of the troubles that they're experiencing in their lives. And I felt like it did a better job of kind of obviously, you have to tell these stories through humans, but in kind of turning the attention onto institutions, the criminal justice system first and foremost amongst that.
I would agree. And, Tracy, I thought another theme that they explore in a very interesting way is, first of all, I mean, there are a lot of people who are damaged by fathers in this. Fathers who were so intent. I mean, no, once again, not evil fathers. Fathers who were so intent. This is true of two fathers in this series in particular, in making sure that their offspring somehow or other could climb the rungs of the system, would not be ground down by the system, could have the kind of resilience and strength that it would take to fight through some of the kinds of problems that Bill is describing, that they really damaged their offspring in the process. And there's sort of that notion of sort of family hurting you in a way that it doesn't mean to, and also this notion of seeking family wherever that you can find it, whether it's in a gang that you've been in the past that you rejoin, or the notion that this incredibly corrupt vice squad is your family, which we're told again and again, right?
Right. And I think that it was a nice theme to have, because I think that as much as that, there's so many things that do grind us down. It can be sort of internal, where it's familial and, your job, your whatever, the people that you surround yourself with. And it is a little more external, like the systems that are designed to uphold certain kinds of folks and sort of continue to marginalize other kinds of folks. I happen to be writing a grant, actually, for the school that I work for while I was watching this. And our students are boys of color who come from underserved communities. And it was sort of, not all of them come from damaged homes or low income or, what you traditionally think of as underserved, but some of them do. And so it was really interesting to think in terms of the grant I was writing and what I was watching. And it all sort of comes together in this hot mess, really.
Carolyn, if somebody asked you whether to watch this, would you recommend it or not?
So I didn't hate it. I felt like it was a little bit long. Like it was they could have edited like half of this out and it would have been just as good, if not better. I think, like I said, I think the acting was really, really great. And I think it has important things to discuss, but a lot of that got lost in that there are just so many issues and so many layers that sometimes I felt like the big issue at hand with the race struggles I think that they could have like redirected everything and just I don't know. I felt like there was just so many, because you had I don't want to give away stuff.
You should not.
Yeah.
You should not.
There is one, I think, unexpected but really important revelation, although Tracy expected it, but I didn't, which we won't tell you about. But I think is
I think
it's
that life
important
is
to
layered,
what they're trying to do.
And it is important. But I felt like it was just so long, and there were so many paths that they were taking that sometimes things got lost.
Of course, The Wire is really long. The Wire, which many of us salute as the greatest piece of television ever created, was five seasons. And Bill, I sort of start with The Wire, and everything kind of descends from there. And this aspires to many of the qualities of The Wire. I think it's very hard to get that particular lightning in a bottle again. I thought The Night of, the John Turturro thing that was done on HBO was close. Having somebody like Richard Price involved as a writer is always helpful. But I thought this came it aspires to that level of quality. I don't think it quite reaches it, but it doesn't fail by that much either.
I agree. It's not The Wire. Let's be clear about this. It's not the artistic achievement that The Wire was, and it does have those flaws, that both Tracy and Carolyn have pointed out. But I think if it falls short as an artistic achievement, what it really does well with is what we were talking about in the first segment, which is bringing politics and culture together. And I think it does that quite well. And I think it can be summed up in this legal phrase that appears in the program, and a lot of, the reviewers and my wife both keyed in on, which is depraved indifference. This is a program about the depraved indifference that marginalized people are treated with in this country. And so, in terms of casting a light on that, I would say pretty successful.
Yeah, I do think there's some bad writing in this series, and then there's
There
some
is.
fabulous writing in this series.
It's,
Yeah,
it's
that- it
spotty.
just- yeah,
maybe
it was
8
spotty like the
episodes
men's
instead
facial
of 10.
hair.
I also think one of the things that it got very right in sort of exploring this depraved indifference is that it didn't give you little tiny happy endings everywhere. You know, everybody had realistic endings, things that would happen today. And I mean on the big ending level, and also each character's sort of where they wound up and what they wound up doing. Sorry if this is a mini spoiler, not everybody winds up happy here.
No,
Very
it's-
few of them do, but it is what would probably happen in this situation.
I actually appreciated that most about
Right,
this. When I
same.
did get to the end, there was a point where I was getting nervous because a part of me wanted some happy endings here, but I knew that in order to really like this show and appreciate it for what it's done, I didn't want that.
The
No,
show
it's-
we're talking about is 7 Seconds. Somebody just complained on Twitter we hadn't said the title in a while. It's 7 Seconds. You can see it on Netflix. We should probably break so that we'll have time for recommendations. I do want to quickly mention just one, I thought, stellar piece of writing. There's a confrontation between one of the cops and his father. His father is a kind of ne'er-do-well, drunk, and other failure of some kind. And they kind of shout it out in a way that is perhaps maybe familiar from other scenes like that you've seen with the younger man saying he just never wants to see his father again, stay away from me and my family. And his father says, it looks at him with a kind of odd bit of tenderness and longing and says, just keep on living. And then there's a little pause and he says, you'll see. That one just tore my heart out. Talk about being ground down. That is the father's anticipation, is that the longer you live, the more that life does grind you into the worst possible kind of pulverized stuff. All right, we've got to take a quick break. We'll come back.
Today's show was produced by Jonathan McPants with help from me, Kyone Wolf, and Betsy Kaplan. The part of Bill Curry was played by Regina King. On Monday, revisit our conversation about the history of women in pants. And now, back to Colin.
It's time to make some endorsements or recommendations. We'll start over here with Tracy Wu Fastenberg. What have you got for us?
So I have two recommendations. First is a piece done by Vice's sort of women's section called Broadly. And the title of it is sort of terrible. It's 100 Easy Ways to Make Women's Lives More Bearable. And it sounds like, bring her flowers, clean up the dishes. But the list is actually sort of great. And when you're talking about inclusive feminism, with yesterday being International Women's Day, they came out with something that was a little more substantive than your usual sort of like hug a woman or whatever type of thing. It talks about how to help marginalized women, how to recognize trans women. And it's a nice long list that if you're raising children, if you are a human, that you should probably read. It's affirming as a woman. And I think for those who do not identify as women, it's a great read also. And it is a listicle, but it's a good one. The other thing that I want to endorse is Johnny's Jog for Charity, which is coming up on March 25th. Starts at Blueback. It's a Sunday morning at 10:30. It is in honor of a young man who passed away from a rare syndrome, but it benefits a few local charities for children. And that includes the school that I work at, Covenant Prep, where we work with middle school boys from underserved communities around Hartford. And so it is a 5K. Some people run it, some people walk it. It's sort of St. Patrick's Day themed, so you can throw on your green and sort of stumble around, and nobody will think anything of it.
All right, Bill Usman, what have you got for us?
Couple events coming up at Sacred Heart University that I'm involved with. On March 21st at 6:30 p.m., we're going to have a conversation on sports and race with Doug Glanville, who was a Major League Baseball player ESPN commentator and an author. He's actually a Hartford resident now.
Been on the show many times.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's great. And Dave Zirin, who is the sports editor for The Nation.
Been on the show many times.
Prolific author writing on sports and politics, right? You know, that intersection of politics and culture. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to be hosting the conversation between
You've also
them.
been on the show many times.
There's a through line.
Yeah.
And then on March 27th, we're going to be doing a screening of the documentary film about James Baldwin, who has not been on the show many times, called I Am Not Your Negro. We're going to do a screening and a discussion of it. Both those events are free and open to the public, so come on down March 21st and March 27th, Sacred Heart University.
All right. And Carolyn Payne, what have you got for us?
All right. So kind of what we were talking about with the Times article and in honor of National Women's Day, International Women's Day, there is a book that is called In Praise of Difficult Women, and it's just a really fun read. Each chapter focuses on a woman from like Carrie Fisher to Amelia Earhart, and it kind of just looks at what made them stand out and why they, you know, sort of just went against their times, and they were like gloriously imperfect in their own ways. So it's just it's a fun book, and is a nice look at the lives of a lot of great women. And also something I did love on Netflix recently was the show Everything Sucks. I am a child of the 90s, so I found it highly relatable. The soundtrack is spectacular. I have now just downloaded all these songs I had forgotten about that just were such an anchor to my youth. And this show uses that soundtrack as like a great character in itself. And the characters in this show are really interesting and well thought out. And it's a great look at that 90s period.
What's it called again?
Everything Sucks.
All right. So if I were to tell you, I'm sort of on a limb making this a recommendation. I'm going to have to sort of cushion that somehow. But if I were to tell you that there was a movie that starred Anna Paquin, also featured Mark Ruffalo, Matthew Broderick, Matt Damon, Allison Janney, Kieran Culkin, maybe not at the same level, John Gallagher. I could go on. You might think, was this some kind of X-Men Avengers movie that I missed? No, it's a movie called Margaret. It has a very strange history. Yeah, Kenneth Lonergan, who's also in it, directed it in 2011 and then couldn't get it released the way that he wanted it released, and it stalled his career. He basically went from there to finally doing Manchester by the Sea because he couldn't get this thing released the way he wanted it. It's now available in its 3-hour-long Kenneth Lonergan form. I watched this partly because my cable was out and I had it on Blu-ray, and so I could actually do something anyway. It has some similarities to 7 Seconds. There are some issues that come up that are not that different from some of the issues that come up on 7 Seconds. The other thing that it has is J. Smith Cameron, who isn't as famous as all the other people I just named. She's the wife of Kenneth Lonergan. She's an amazing actress. I fell in love with her as the mother on Rectify. And she is the mother of Anna Paquin in this, and she is fabulous. And so you have to be really interested in movies. You have to be willing to put up with almost innumerable panoramic shots of the New York skyline, the reverse of which we get a lot in 7 Seconds, which is set in Jersey City. So you're sort of always looking at New York cities and the Statue of Liberty's behind, basically. But Lonergan is very sweeping in his use of landscape. I would say it probably he wrecked his life to get the unedited version out. Probably a slightly edited version would have been better. This does feel a little plodding at times, but it's also kind of a masterpiece of a vision that weaves together everything from violent death to opera to a young teenager making really bad sexual choices. It's sort of as if Lady Bird were written by Richard Price, or if Lady Bird somehow or there was like one season of The Wire or something. You get something a little bit like this movie. So I just don't get mad at me if you watch it. You have to watch the 3-hour version, apparently. David Edelstein insists that is the case. And it's called Margaret, just that name. There's no character in it named Margaret. That's a reference to a Jared Manley Hopkins poem, I believe. And don't send me angry emails if you watch it and you hate it, because I would predict that a certain percentage of the audience would feel exactly that way. And 50% of the household in which I live had thought this was a really, really long movie. Anyway, give it a try if I've intrigued you at all. Meanwhile, thanks very much to Tracy Wu Fastenberg and Bill Usman and Carolyn Payne. We will have a couple of our favorite shows on for you next week on Monday and Tuesday as Jonathan McPants and I go to a conference, and then we will be back on Wednesday with our very exciting Bill Curry and Julia Pistel annual March Madness show.
Avon, Farmington, yeah.